I want to divorce my husband, but everyone keeps telling me that I will die if I do this alone. My son will go through a psychological crisis because of the situation. Also, there's the issue about his father's affair. What is the best thing to do? Dear Sir or Madam, my name is Sarah, and I am a 37-year-old mother of 3 wonderful children. I have a 12-year-old son named Jack, a 9-year-old daughter named Mia, and the youngest, Lily, who is just 4. My husband Tom is 40 years old. We have been married for 15 years, but our journey together began 5 years before we exchanged vows, making it a total of 2 decades. Over the years, side by side, we built a life that, on the surface, was almost idyllic. It was filled with the usual ups and downs of family life, but grounded in what I believed to be a solid partnership. We met in college, drawn together by common interests and mutual friends. Tom was studying to be an engineer, and I was immersed in my psychology courses. We were young and ambitious, each with dreams that seemed perfectly aligned. After graduation, we moved in together, and not long after, we decided to get married. Our wedding wasn't extravagant, but it was ours and felt like the beginning of a promising future. The first few years of our marriage were busy and vibrant as we both climbed our respective career ladders. Tom worked at an engineering firm, and I was in private counseling. Children soon followed, and with each addition, our home became more lively and chaotic in the best way. Jack's birth brought a new kind of love into our lives, and with Mia and Lily, our family felt complete, and life settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings were a whirlwind of breakfast, hurriedly eaten, school bags hurriedly packed, and quick kisses. Evenings were for family dinners, homework help, and the occasional movie on a night when we could all agree on what to watch. Tom and I were partners in the truest sense, sharing responsibilities and supporting each other's ambitions. Our family life had a dynamic that worked well for us. I have always been the primary breadwinner in our household, thanks to a successful career in private counseling, which flourished over the years. This provided comfort and stability. Although Tom's financial contribution was less substantial, it always felt equally important in the balance of our lives together. He was a loving and devoted father, and until this incident, I believed him to be a devoted husband as well. But not everything was as perfect as it seemed. About a year ago, I began to notice changes in Tom that I initially dismissed as work stress or the usual ebb and flow of marriage. He became more cautious with his phone, his behavior became more erratic, and there were nights when he seemed distant, lost in his thoughts. I couldn't reach him. I asked if something was wrong, but his answers were always the same: just tired, just busy. The day I discovered the truth about Tom's infidelity began like any other. I had woken up early to make breakfast for the kids and get them ready for school. The morning rush had become a routine that I could almost perform mechanically, which probably explains why I first noticed the subtle changes in Tom's behavior. He was distracted, not his usual self, not playfully helping to pack lunches or teasing Mia about her perpetually mismatched socks. This particular morning, Tom had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in another room. Normally, I respected his privacy as he respected mine, but a message flashed across the screen just as I was cleaning it up. It was from someone named JS and it said, "Can't wait for tonight." My heart skipped a beat. Confusion and curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself doing something I never thought I would do. I picked up his phone and opened the message. The message was a gut punch. There were plans for dinner, exchanges of, "I miss you," and "Can't wait to see you," all interwoven with heart and kiss emojis. The playful intimacy of her words was missing from our recent exchanges. I scrolled through weeks of deceit, each message a hammer striking at the foundation of our marriage. Standing there, feeling like a stranger in my own kitchen, I put the phone down and tried to process what I had seen. I felt betrayed, foolish, and unbearably hurt. Tom came downstairs dressed for work, and I saw him in a different light. No longer the man I had trusted implicitly, but a stranger who had brought deception into our home. I immediately confronted him, my voice trembling as I asked him about her. Frozen, his face drained of color, his first reaction was to stammer and claim that it was nothing. But when I described the messages I had read, his shoulders slumped, and he confessed that it was Jennifer Stone, our daughter Mia's teacher. The affair had been going on for months. The air between us felt charged. Words flew with a cold electricity. His apologies and pleas mingled with my tears and accusations. I demanded to know why, but his explanations, stale lines about feeling disconnected and lost, offered no real insight or understanding. And our once warm kitchen felt like a desolate void. The effects of his betrayal were immediate and overwhelming. I was consumed by a maelstrom of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief that the man I had built a life with, had children with, had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible, not just me, but our family, our children. I couldn't stay in the same house with Tom. That day, I needed space to think and to breathe, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of betrayal. I dropped the kids off at school, barely holding it together long enough to walk them to their classrooms. Then, instead of driving to work, I drove aimlessly and ended up in a local park, where I sat on a bench overlooking a duck pond, a place that had once been a sanctuary for family outings. Sitting there, I felt the weight of the reality that my marriage might be over. Yet there was also a fierce determination within me. I knew that I could not let this go, that I couldn't just play the role of the forgiving spouse and sweep the affair under the rug as if it were just a minor hiccup in our marriage. This was a breach of trust that went deep, and it demanded action. After hours of sitting alone, I made a decision that felt like the only viable one. I would confront Jennifer Stone. It wasn't just about confronting the woman who had an affair with my husband, it was about regaining some sense of control over the chaos that had suddenly become my life. It was about protecting my family, my children, and my own self-respect. After making sure the kids were in school and that Mia was in a different class for the day, I went to see Jennifer. I found her in her classroom before the school day began. The room was brightly decorated with the children's artwork and held the promise of lessons yet to be learned. She looked surprised to see me, a polite smile fading from her face as she registered the seriousness of my expression. I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding. The confrontation was direct and tense. I asked her if she knew that Tom was married, that he had children who looked up to her as a teacher. Her apology was quiet and seemed sincere, but it did little to quench the fire of my anger. I told her that I would report the affair to the school board. It was not a decision driven by revenge, but by a need for some form of accountability. I left her classroom. I felt shaky, but empowered to have taken the first steps in reshaping my life and my children's futures. As I drove home, my cell phone buzzed and lit up with incoming calls that I stubbornly ignored. The screen showed Tom's name. Again and again, each call was a reminder of the rift that had opened up between us. I couldn't bring myself to answer. Yet my thoughts were still raw, my emotions were a tangled mess of hurt and outrage. Each ring felt like an intrusion, an insistence to listen to excuses I wasn't ready to hear. When the calls finally stopped, the silence was quickly filled with the ping of incoming texts. I glanced at the screen. Tom's words seemed desperate on the digital screen. "I'm sorry," followed by more pleas. "I will break up with her, I promise. Just give me a chance." The messages piled up, each more pleading than the last, promising to break up. He swore it was over, saying, "You know how much you and the kids mean to me." As I drove, his words ran through my mind. Was this plea for forgiveness rooted in a genuine recognition of his mistake, or was it motivated by the fear of losing the comfortable life we had built? I weighed his sincerity against the practical aspects of our lives. Could a man who feared the loss of a way of life be trusted not to stray again if the opportunity presented itself under less dire circumstances? As I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, the tranquility of our home on the outside belied the turmoil I felt inside. As I walked through the front door, I was greeted by the stillness of an empty house. The kids were still at school, and Tom was probably dreading this inevitable confrontation somewhere else. The silence gave me room to think, to really consider my next steps. Sitting at the kitchen table where so many family meals had been shared, I placed my keys and phone in front of me. Tom's texts continued to light up the screen intermittently, each message a thread trying to mend the tear in our relationship. I thought about what it would mean to give Tom another chance. Could trust truly be rebuilt from such a betrayal? Was I willing to invest more years into a relationship that might never regain its former strength? These were not questions that could be answered in the heat of emotion. They required calm reflection and possibly professional guidance. But more than the betrayal itself, it was the manner of discovery that stung. If I hadn't seen those messages, Tom would have continued the affair, content in his duplicity. The thought was chilling and brought with it a wave of loneliness, an isolation that came not from being physically alone, but from the realization of the emotional gulf that had grown between us without my realizing it. Completely empty and overwhelmed, I picked up the phone and called my best friend, whose advice I always sought in times of crisis. As soon as she answered, my resolve crumbled, and I found myself sobbing into the phone, unable to fully articulate the deep sense of betrayal I felt. She listened patiently, her voice a calm presence in the storm of my emotions. After I managed to explain everything, she insisted that divorce was the only viable option. However, she also suggested that I talk with my mother before making any decisions, given her experience with a similar situation, despite her different approach. I hesitated to call my mother. I wasn't ready to hear her voice directly, worried that it might contain either an "I told you so" or undue sympathy, neither of which I felt ready to handle. Instead, I turned to an online community where I had an anonymous account, hoping to gain some perspective from people who had faced similar dilemmas. I laid out my story in a post and asked for guidance and support from those who had navigated the treacherous waters of infidelity and its aftermath. The responses began to trickle in, and as I read through them, a sinking feeling took over. Many comments were disheartening, and some echoed societal cliches and stereotypes I had hoped to avoid. Some might think that a single mother with 3 children would have difficulty finding a new partner. I'm already 37 years old. Others might conclude that I should just let him cheat because, after all, he's a good father and pays the bills. Thinking about the children, it is common to consider how a divorce would affect them. Divorce is always hard on kids. Every comment felt like a stab in the back, questioning my self-worth and the legitimacy of my feelings. I thought deeply about my children's future. What would happen to them without their father's constant presence? Would my decision to divorce scar them emotionally or make them feel abandoned? The weight of these questions weighed on me as I tried to separate society's expectations from my own needs and the well-being of my children. The thought that kept coming back to me was whether staying in a loveless marriage just for the sake of appearances or financial stability was really better for the children. Could I teach them about respect and self-worth if I wasn't practicing these values myself? After hours of internal debate, I decided it was time to call my mother. I needed her perspective as someone who had walked this path before, someone who had experienced the pain and repercussions of such a betrayal. As I dialed my mother's number, the heaviness in my chest seemed to echo louder as she answered. Her voice was a soothing balm, but it did little to loosen the knot of anxiety tied deep inside me. "Mom," I began, my voice betraying the chaos of emotions I felt swirling inside me. There was a pause as I gathered my thoughts, then I poured out everything, about discovering Tom's affair, the confrontation with him and Jennifer Stone, and the unbearable hurt and betrayal that followed. I tried to steady my voice, but the pain was palpable. My mother was listening to every word. There was silence on the other end of the line. There were no interruptions, only the empathetic understanding of someone who had walked a painfully similar path. When I finished, there was a heavy pause, a moment of shared grief stretching across the miles between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and laced with a sadness that spoke of old wounds. "I know how you feel." She began her words slowly and deliberately. "You know, I went through this with your father. I felt my world had ended. I made the decision to leave him, and he never forgave me. He left us, and I was alone with you until..." Her story wasn't new to me, but hearing it in this moment, framed by my own broken marriage, gave it a new poignancy. "Sometimes I wish I had never divorced him," she continued. "He was angry. He felt betrayed that I didn't try to work things out. Maybe if I had, you'd still have a father who was present, not just a memory." The weight of her regret settled over me like a shroud. I had always known the story from her perspective, but now I found myself wondering about the myriad of what-ifs that haunted her choices. He left because he couldn't handle the rejection, not only of his affair but also of his hope for reconciliation. She had been single for so long because she was afraid. "Sarah, I didn't want to bring someone new into our lives who might hurt us more, or worse. You have a daughter, and you are my daughter. I didn't get married because I didn't want what some men might do to my daughter. I wanted to protect you. Maybe sometimes too much." Her confession was like a knife in my already wounded heart. The fear of further betrayal and the loneliness of single parenthood were issues that resonated all too well with me now, making me question the path I had taken with such conviction. "Sweetheart," she gently urged, "consider all sides. I know it's hard, I know you're hurting. But you have your children to think about. Whatever you decide, make sure it's something you can live with in the long run. Don't rush into anything that's driven by hurt." Her words echoed in my head for a long time. We said goodbye, and I sat alone. The silence of the house enveloped me, allowing me to stew in my thoughts. Mom's experience served as a cautionary tale but also as a poignant reminder of the complexities involved in making such deeply personal decisions. Tom's betrayal had cut me deeply, undermining not only our marriage but also my understanding of our entire life together. Yet my mother's words haunted me. The possibility of regretting a hasty decision made in a moment of pain, with long-term consequences not only for me but also for my children. Could I live with the same regrets? Was I strong enough to face the challenges of single parenthood without becoming bitter or overly protective, as she had been? These questions swirled in my mind as I considered the reality of my situation. My children were so young and impressionable. What would this do to them? Jack, Mia, and Lily were my world. Their well-being had to come first, but figuring out the best way to ensure it was like solving a puzzle with pieces that no longer seemed to fit together. The thought of tearing their lives apart by removing their father from our home broke my heart, but so did the thought of them growing up in a home without real love and trust between their parents. As the days passed, these thoughts were never far from my mind. I watched the children play, their laughter bittersweet to my ears, a stark contrast to the silence between Tom and me. We were like ghosts in the same house, our interactions awkward and polite, but the warmth we once shared had cooled into something formal and strained. Every day, he pressed me to make a decision. I thought about counseling. I wondered if it could possibly mend what was broken. Could a therapist help us find a way back to each other, or at least to a place where we could co-parent effectively and without resentment? Or was the gulf between us now too wide, the hurt too deep? These thoughts were my constant companions, haunting the quiet moments of my days and the long, sleepless nights. What was best for me? What was best for my children? Could those two answers ever be reconciled? In the wake of Tom's betrayal, living with Tom while we worked through our issues was a daily struggle. Every look, every casual touch was a painful reminder of the betrayal. I couldn't bear to be around him. His presence in our home, once a source of comfort and joy, now felt suffocating. I instinctively recoiled the last time he reached out his hand to brush mine as he passed the salt at dinner. I jerked my hand back as if the simple gesture was loaded with the weight of his infidelity, making him a stranger in the eyes of the woman who had loved him deeply. Living under the same roof in such tension was like navigating a minefield. We were civil, mostly for the children's sake, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. It became clear that living together was only temporary, a necessary arrangement until we could work out the logistics of our separation. However, the issue of abandonment was something I couldn't easily shake off. Having experienced the pain of my father's departure after my parents' divorce, I was acutely aware of the scars it could leave on a child. I was afraid of repeating history, worried about how my children would cope with the breakdown of our family unit. Would they understand why I had to make this decision? Would they resent me, or worse? Would they think that all relationships were doomed? The idea of living as roommates was briefly considered. It seemed a practical solution on the surface, maintaining a stable home environment for the children while living separate lives. But the more I thought about it, I realized it was not feasible. The emotional toll it would take on all of us would be too great. Our home would become a facade, a place where we played roles instead of living our lives. I didn't want that for my children. They deserved a home filled with real love and respect, not silent battles and forced interactions. Through these reflections, the decision to proceed with the divorce was reinforced. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, from logistical nightmares to emotional upheaval, but I also knew it was the right thing to do. I wanted to show my children that it was okay to stand up for themselves, that self-respect was important, and that sometimes happiness required hard choices. Living in the same house while preparing for divorce proceedings was like threading a needle with shaky hands. We maintained a facade of normalcy for the sake of our children, who were blissfully unaware of the seismic shifts beneath the surface of our family life. This delicate balance was further complicated when I had to undergo laparoscopic surgery. The procedure meant that I couldn't strain my eyes with activities such as watching movies or reading for 48 to 72 hours, and even everyday tasks became challenging because of the discomfort and pressure on my eyes for days. So, in my office, Tom took on a role I hadn't seen him fill in years, if ever. He took over the household chores, from dusting to cooking and laundry. He was attentive, gentle, reminding me to take my eye drops and checking in to make sure I was comfortable. For a brief moment, it felt like the old days, when our partnership seemed solid and loving. I found myself wondering if this was the man I had fallen in love with, who had somehow resurfaced in the midst of our current turmoil. However, these thoughts were fleeting. I couldn't help but remember that this level of care and cooperation was uncharacteristic of Tom. Especially in recent years, when I had been bedridden with the flu last winter, he had barely lifted a finger without being asked, and complained loudly when he did. So his sudden change in behavior seemed conveniently timed, almost as if he was performing the acts of a devoted husband to influence my decision regarding the divorce. It was hard not to see his efforts as strategic attempts at gaining favor rather than genuine acts of love or contrition. The kindness he showed after the surgery did little to erase the vivid memories of betrayal. The messages I had read between him and his affair partner still haunted me. The intimacy and affection they shared, documented in those texts, were in stark contrast to the utilitarian exchanges that had become the norm between the two of us. The days in which he played the role of a caring partner couldn't compensate for the months of deception and the emotional scars it had left. With these thoughts on my mind, I decided it was time to have a frank conversation with Tom. Wearing my new glasses, which somehow made me feel more shielded and serene, I sat him down and explained that my decision to divorce was final. I reassured him that I had no intention of severing his relationship with our children. He would always be their father, but he could no longer be my husband. I suggested that we attend counseling, not to rebuild our marriage, but to ensure that we could effectively co-parent and provide a stable environment for our children during our separation. Tom's demeanor was somber. He apologized profusely for his actions and, for the first time, opened up about the affair in a way that wasn't just an excuse. He admitted that he saw the affair as an escape from our routine lives, not realizing the full impact of what he was doing. He expressed remorse for the damage he had caused to our family, our trust, and even the professional life of the woman he was involved with. He told me he had ended the affair and cut off all contact with her. In acknowledging the destruction he had caused, Tom also expressed a dramatic resolve, claiming he would never date again. I cautioned him against making such sweeping statements. Promises now, no matter how earnest, seemed like mere words after the trust between us had been so thoroughly shattered. The ordeal of dealing with my husband's infidelity has been heartbreaking, not only for me but also for our children. The ripple effects of this have touched every part of our lives, perhaps none more painfully than the lives of our 3 children, Jack, Mia, and Lily. Jack, our oldest, has been the most affected at 12. He's at an age where he understands far more than I would wish for a child his age. The knowledge of his father's affair has not only shaken the foundations of his family but also seems to have shattered his view of his father. I recently learned that rumors of the affair had been circulating at his school. It's a small community, and news travels fast, and sometimes cruelly. This revelation has only added to his hurt and confusion. His reaction has been to retreat into himself, especially around his father. Jack has taken to refusing meals prepared by Tom. Just last week, Tom made spaghetti, a family favorite, and tried to lighten the mood with a joke about his famous secret sauce. Jack didn't laugh, he didn't even acknowledge his father. Instead, he pushed his plate away and made himself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He stuck to this diet for the next few days, relentlessly preparing his own meals. Mia and Lily did not fully understand the situation, but they felt the tension in the air and were following their older brother's lead. For days now, it's been peanut butter and jelly for them too, and the effect on Tom has been palpable. I've caught him crying quietly in the garage after these meals. It breaks my heart. Despite everything, Tom loves his children deeply. He may have failed as a husband, but he has always been a dedicated father. He coaches Jack's soccer team, he's been to every ballet recital that Mia reluctantly attends, and he's the first one to rush to Lily's side at night when she cries from a bad dream. I understand the children's feelings. They feel betrayed by their father's actions, which have shattered the only world they've ever known. But at the same time, I don't want them to lose their ability to trust and grow up wrapping their young hearts in bitterness. This is a pivotal moment, and how we handle it could affect their ability to trust and form relationships for the rest of their lives. I've been thinking about seeking professional help. Perhaps a family counselor could provide the tools we need to get through this painful time. Jack in particular might benefit from talking to someone who could offer a neutral ear and wise counsel. Tom and I have discussed this. Even in the midst of our own tumultuous feelings, we agree that regardless of the future of our marriage, our priority is and must always be the welfare of our children. We are considering starting with some family therapy sessions. Tom and I are in the middle of a divorce. We need to find a way to work together to help our children adjust to this new reality. This is not just about getting through the day, it's about laying a foundation for our children's future that shows them that even in times of deep hurt and betrayal, there can be healing and forgiveness. Not necessarily for the sake of reconciliation between the spouses, but for the ongoing relationship between a father and his children, and even for the future selves of the children. To anyone who may be reading this and has gone through similar struggles, any advice on how to deal with these situations, especially with children of very young ages, would be greatly appreciated. How do you maintain the delicate balance between acknowledging their feelings of betrayal while encouraging forgiveness, not for the sake of the wronged parent, but for their own future emotional health? This is the question that occupies my thoughts day and night as we try to create a new kind of normal.